We're in public session now. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Committee for Procedures. We are quorate at the moment, but we are expecting another couple of members to join us shortly, I hope. Members, the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. You're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode and all devices are muted. It is not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. And just checking with all if any members have interest to declare in relation to today's meeting. No. And moving on, apologies. We've received apologies from our Deputy Chair, Sinead Ennis, and from Danny Donnelly. Is anyone else aware of any other apologies? No? Okay, thank you. Members, going to agenda item 2, draft minutes. This is the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of September, and they're at page 5 to 10 of the meeting pack. Just to check with members, are they content that the minutes are a true reflection of the proceedings of the meeting held on the 11th of September? Yep, thank you. If so, then I'll sign the minutes. Thank you. There you go. So agenda item 3 is chairperson's business. Just to confirm that the Deputy Chair and I held a very useful and cordial meeting with the Speaker on Tuesday the 17th of September to discuss the approach taken by us on proxy voting for parental leave in plenary before the position is finalised. Hopefully we'll do that at the meeting on the 9th of October. A note of that meeting can be found at pages 12 and 13 of your meeting pack. The Speaker, we told the Speaker about the parameters of the provision for parental leave and confirmed that proxy voting would not be available for parental leave associated with attending appointments for children, looking after sick children, etc. The discussion also covered the rationale for us including fostering, the deadline for submission of an application for proxy voting, the exclusion of the Speaker and Deputy Speakers from acting as proxy, and tellers being strongly discouraged from acting as proxy. The committee's position on a number of proxy votes one member could hold, and that the suggested duration would be 9 months for all categories of parental leave and should be taken in one block, taking into account recess periods. We also highlighted that the standing order would only come into effect once the Speaker has issued the accompanying guidance, and the Speaker suggested that the clerks to the committee liaise with the business office clerks to discuss the guidance and a potential timeline for issue. The meeting also provided an opportunity to update the Speaker on progress on the committee's other priority areas of work and the suggestions in his letter to the committee on the 8th of April for priorities. The Speaker elaborated on his thinking around the potential reviews of the Assembly oral questions and Assembly written questions, which were quite useful. He also noted that recent court judgments regarding the Assembly's legislative scrutiny process were being considered internally, and he had concerns over the opportunities for ministers to produce miscellaneous bills. I'm asking members if you are happy to note a record of the meeting, and if you have any other clarification that you need, please do ask. We can provide that for you. Are we happy to note?
Yeah,
thank you very much. Agenda item 4, matters arising. There are currently no matters arising to cover. Agenda item 5 is the research paper on electronic voting in parliamentary chambers. Members of the strategic planning session in April 2024, a potential inquiry into electronic voting in plenary proceedings was discussed, and there was general consensus that it would be helpful to receive further information on electronic voting systems in other legislatures and how the new infrastructure in the Assembly chamber could support electronic voting before deciding on whether or not to undertake an inquiry into electronic voting and the priority to be given to it. It's very timely today given the fact that we'll be discussing our priorities later. An oral briefing on research paper on electronic voting in other parliamentary chambers will take place now, and at the end of the meeting we'll move over to the Assembly chamber for a briefing on the infrastructure recently installed as part of the modernisation programme and its potential to support electronic voting in plenary. The briefing will be provided by... the briefing in the chamber will be provided by David Erock, I hope I'm pronouncing his name appropriately, a technical consultant from Wave Science Technology, and Michael Cairns, acting head of communications. A memo from the clerks providing further information on some issues members may wish to explore during the briefing in the chamber is at 16 and 17 of your pack. The research paper can be found at pages 18 to 48. Ray McCaffrey, welcome Ray, to the committee, is an Assembly researcher, and Ray will be outlining the key points covered in his research paper on electronic voting in other parliamentary chambers. So Ray, over to you. Thank you very much for providing us with the research paper.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. So the research paper does look at the use of electronic voting in selected legislatures and highlights potential issues perhaps for further consideration. So it looked at the Canadian House of Commons, the Scottish Parliament, the Senate, the Welsh Parliament, Dáil Éireann, European Parliament, Spanish Senate and the US House of Representatives. And just to note, there's fairly limited literature on this subject in terms of academic discussion on really the desirability and effectiveness of electronic voting. So much of the paper relies on reports from parliamentary committees and information that legislatures themselves have published, with input from other sources where possible. The paper contains a lot of detail, so I'll focus on what I hope are really just the key points and takeaways. And I suppose a useful place to begin is really the prevalence of electronic voting. The Inter-Parliamentary Union produces biannual e-Parliament reports, and they look at the use of technology and digitisation in legislatures. And as part of this, the prevalence of e-voting is surveyed. So their reports from 2010 to 2018, although no report was published in 2014, show a majority of parliaments using or showing a desire to implement some form of electronic voting. Now this becomes more complicated during the COVID-19 era, and the data isn't just directly comparable in many cases. But generally you could say that there is a tendency to embrace new technologies to accommodate parliamentary business. And I think figure 1 in the paper shows data from 2020, shows the most popular forms of voting. So 19% of those parliaments surveyed still used the manual method, but 23% were using a voting button, 18% were using remote electronic means, and 13% were using manual but with an electronic tally. Turning to the Canadian House of Commons, the infrastructure there was first installed in 2004, but no progress was really made in implementing e-voting until COVID-19. And it's really not clear what relationship, if any, the original infrastructure has to the model eventually adopted. But during COVID, between September and March 2021, the system was developed, tested and refined to ensure that it met the needs of members. Members had the option of participating in 2 simulations and could then provide feedback to the House of Commons administration and suggest areas for potential improvement. And the Canadian House of Commons really had set out priorities for what their remote e-voting system should look like. So it was security, equal access for all members, integration in the chamber, bilingualism and immediate voting results. And it's important to emphasise that MPs who are present in the Canadian House of Commons still vote in the traditional manner by rising in their places to have their vote recorded. So electronic voting applies only to those members not in the chamber. And the extract from standing orders makes it clear that in the event where a member happens to cast their vote both in person and electronically, the vote cast in person will take precedence. So the paper sets out in quite a lot of detail how the system works, but I'll just cover a few of the key points in relation to Canada. And again, this is just remote voting. In order to use the electronic voting application, members must use a mobile device provided by the House of Commons and be connected to a cellular or Wi-Fi network in Canada. The device must be enrolled on the House's mobile device management platform, and members must be registered with that system. The division bells will ring as usual in the parliamentary precinct. Countdown clock will then appear on the chamber proceedings broadcast and in the remote voting system when members are logged in. Members also receive notification of the vote through multiple channels, including their parliamentary email address. Members can tap motion details to see the motion subject, sponsor and full text. To cast their vote through the electronic voting system, members must tap the vote button. They can change their vote before the end of the 10-minute voting period, but should a member wish to change their vote after this, the unanimous consent of the House is required. And you will see that often in Hansard extracts where members will ask the Speaker, presiding officer, can they change their vote, and the unanimous consent of the House is granted. And a technical support team is available to assist members before, during and after the voting process. In June 2023, a debate was held on the desirability of moving or permanently to hybrid proceedings, which would include electronic voting. The vote was passed, although there was a lot of debate and a lot of division within the House of Commons. So they weren't really universally welcomed, but they were eventually adopted. During that debate, the issue of timings was raised, and it was pointed out that the electronic voting application allowed divisions to be recorded in about 10 or 12 minutes, and this was on a par with divisions before the pandemic. And I guess this is probably going to be a key consideration really for members. How much, if any, time could be saved to moving to an electronic form of voting, whether that's simply in the chamber or with remote capability. And I suppose one of the other key considerations will be security, and I guess that, you know, if remote voting is on the table, that sort of expands the security consideration. If it's just going to be internally within the chamber, that's perhaps more easily overcome, although obviously the experts will be able to give a view on that. The Canadian system was evaluated by their national security partners, and it met or surpassed all essential and recommended security criteria. The voting app seems to occasionally fail, but this doesn't appear to cause really undue worry. And again, as I mentioned, you know, it seems to be a case of if a member wants to change their vote, they simply say to the Speaker, and that can be accommodated. Turning to the Scottish Parliament, and the key difference between the Scottish Parliament and Canada is that there is electronic voting available in the chamber. There are contingencies in place where the electronic voting system will fail. And to vote, MSPs insert their identity cards into the console at their desk in the chamber. The screen will automatically change to a touch screen during the voting process, and they have 30 seconds to vote, after which the presiding officer announces the result. And again, like other parliaments and legislatures, the Scottish Parliament was forced to adapt and extend its electronic voting system to address the challenges posed by COVID-19. And this included the introduction of remote voting. And at that time, some members did express concern with the remote voting system. For example, when it came to consideration of a large number of amendments, say at stage 3 of a bill, and sort of the stress and uncertainty that might accompany this. But at that time, there was a feeling that while the system was not without its flaws, most issues were due to individual errors and connectivity issues. And the paper actually does present an extract from the official report showing an example of the app freezing, but the presiding officer reassuring the member that their vote will be recorded, much like the Canadian House of Commons. And following consultation with members, the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee recommended that the change be made permanent, so that the rule no longer only refers to the use of the single voting system that is used to run votes when all members are in the chamber. So this allowed then the change to standing orders to allow remote voting as well. Just moving on to the Welsh Parliament, again the chamber is an electronic debating chamber. A dedicated computer system operates in the chamber, and all information relevant to plenary proceedings is accessible via each member's individual computer. And again, the extract at figure 4 sets out how electronic votes are to be conducted. So at the base of the computer there is a slot for a card which identifies each member. There are also 3 buttons: green to vote in favour, white to abstain and red to vote against. So members vote by pressing the button of their choice. The results are shown on display screens in the chamber at the end of each vote. Once the vote is closed, it is not possible to change the vote cast. And if members encounter any problems with the voting system during the electronic vote, they have to draw it immediately to the attention of the presiding officer before the vote is closed. If the system fails for any reason, the vote can be run by show of hands. The presiding officer has the option of conducting the vote by roll call in alphabetical order of all members present. The clerk will then record the result of the vote. Now, in November 2022, guidance was issued on virtual and hybrid proceedings, and it sets out the process for remote electronic voting. So all members use the same online voting application. Members casting votes must be present in the meeting and visible to the chair at all times. So if it's not possible for a member to be visible to the chair for reasons of technical failure, they must be present in the Zoom meeting and clearly audible. And it's solely the responsibility of members to ensure that they have in-person or remote access to a plenary meeting and any voting system that is in operation. And members, it's up to the members to ensure that their connectivity is capable of joining the meeting. If they anticipate that they may have experienced any difficulty, they have to make it known to the Welsh Parliament support staff at the earliest opportunity. Moving to Dáil Éireann, there haven't been, as far as I could tell, there haven't been many changes since the voting controversy in 2019. But I'll just run through quickly the process for voting in the Dáil. So after the bells have been rung and the doors locked, items of business will be announced, the question to be decided, and the names of tellers for each side. The Cancorlia advises members of the requirement to take their designated seat for the purposes of electronic voting. The clerk starts the vote, voting system goes live, and the deputies have 1 minute to vote. Each deputy votes from their assigned seat. They will have previously been informed of their seat number, which is displayed on the seat's voting panel. And a deputy's assigned seat can only be changed on instruction from the relevant whip. The voting panel displays buttons for yes, abstain and no, each of which has a light beside it. When voting begins, the lights flash. When one of the buttons is pressed, the associated light comes on continuously and the other lights stop flashing and turn off. Deputies may change their vote within a 1 minute window. If a deputy changes their vote, the light for the new vote turns on. And so once votes have been completed, the wall display and TV broadcast shows a green, blue or red light corresponding to the seat, depending on how the deputy has voted. And the wall display will also show a countdown with the number of seconds remaining in the vote. There are provisions in place for votes to be taken by means other than the electronic system, for example, where that has failed or is perhaps deemed unreliable. So standing orders allow for a division to be run again where the difference between the total of yes and no votes is 10 or less. In such circumstances, any member may demand that the vote is rerun electronically or taken again otherwise than by electronic means. And members will probably be aware of the difficulties that the Dáil ran into in October 2019. It emerged that members had been voting on behalf of colleagues using their electronic voting system located at each seat. So that was investigated by the Dáil authorities. An independent report was commissioned. Subsequently, it was decided, or it was recommended, that the following changes be implemented. So chip card readers, a two-hand voting system, biometrics, voting displays and additional cameras. This was considered by the Committee on Procedure and they agreed to the recommendation that additional cameras be installed in the Dáil chamber to make video recordings of divisions which can be used later if necessary as part of an audit trail. Remote voting is not available to members of the Dáil, as the Constitution requires that members have to be present when voting. Now, Private Members Bill, which is currently before the Dáil and has been before the Dáil for quite some time, seeks to change this, but its prospects for success, I think, are unclear. And if passed, it would still require ratification in a referendum. Chair, the paper provides information on the European Parliament and Spanish Senate, but I'm aware that a lot of this information can seem sort of repetitive, so I'll move next to the US House of Representatives, which is an interesting example for a number of reasons, but again, their electronic voting is simply confined to the chamber. There is no option for remote voting. And interestingly, the first legislative proposal for an automated voting system dates back to 1886, but it wasn't until 1970 that concrete steps were taken on the issue. And when it was decided that an automated or electronic voting system would be desirable, the House set five criteria. And in some respects, I think these probably have read across to other legislatures, including the Assembly. So firstly, the system should significantly reduce the time required to vote and also meet the information needs of system users. Secondly, each system user, representative, tally clerk, and the media, etc., should have a simple and consistent interface with the system from both a hardware and software viewpoint. Thirdly, the system should have a very high degree of reliability with appropriate levels of automatic testing. Number 4, hardware should be highly compatible with the chamber decor so as to be unobtrusive as possible but still function properly. And lastly, absolute lowest cost was not a prime consideration when weighed against other design objectives. However, cost should be handled prudently. So electronic voting is carried out in the following manner. A member casts a vote by electronic device by inserting a voting card into the nearest voting station and pressing the appropriate button, yea, nay or present. Members should also visually check the voting board to make sure that the light next to their name reflects their intended vote. If a member wishes to change their vote, they may do so by reinserting their card into a voting station and pressing the appropriate button during the first 10 minutes of a 15-minute vote, or at any time during a 5 or 2 minute vote. However, during the last 5 minutes of a 15-minute vote, a change in a member's vote can only be made by going to what they call the well, taking a card from the table, signing it and handing it to the tally clerk on the rostrum. I think interestingly, the system allows members to come and go as they please, leave the chamber if they wish. They don't have to vote at a particular voting station, as I say, or even remain in the chamber once they have voted. In 2018, the House installed a new system that on the surface looks pretty much identical to the one that had operated for really the previous 20 years. But 2 new additions were Braille for visually impaired members and an LCD screen to notify the member if an invalid card had been inserted, for example, a credit card or a library card. But at that stage, it was hoped that changes to the internal hardware would make the system cheaper and easier to maintain. And there is an example of the voting system in the paper, and on the surface, it looks quite basic. Members, I think I'll just probably I'm aware of time, so I'll just end by raising a few issues for consideration. So basically, just to give an overview, it's electronic voting. It's long established in the Scottish Parliament, Welsh Parliament and Dáil Éireann, but COVID raised issues around remote voting, which Scotland and Wales have now adapted. Canadian House of Commons implemented remote electronic voting as a result of COVID, and many members appear to avail of this, although roll call voting is still in use for members in the chamber. And that's probably a discussion to be had around the desirability of just having it in the chamber, or do you want to extend it remotely? And as I said at the start of the presentation, remote voting probably brings into play, additional things like security and identity of members, or is it enough simply to have a system similar to that to the US House of Representatives? And again, just the final issue, would it save time? The evidence on this is limited, but it's difficult to compare one legislature to another. I suppose you get into the areas of trial runs and simulations to actually compare the speed of how the Assembly currently does divisions compared to how they might work with an electronic voting system. So Chair, that's just an overview of the paper, and I'm happy to take questions if members have any.
Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you, because this has really helped to sort of expand out thinking on electronic voting. As Chair, I just wanted to ask you about Westminster. how do they use any of this? Do they have remote voting, or how does that work? Did you look at that?
They did introduce an electronic system for COVID, but as far as I'm aware and on reading their research papers, I think they've moved back to manual voting.
Do they have in their research papers anything that clarifies their reason for moving back? Is it because that is the way that Westminster wants to work? Is that form of...
I think it was the preference. Well, certainly not of all members, but it was decided that it was more desirable. And again, just actually in the conclusion of the paper, for example, the Flemish Parliament as well, because of COVID, brought in electronic voting, but they were minded to go back to the manual system.
How does, from the research papers, tellers, is there anything for tellers then?
In terms?
Just thinking, you've said about there would be screens in some of the legislators, but for tellers checking, I'm just thinking about the Irish situation, where there was this concern about somebody else was using somebody's card and so on. Is there a role for tellers in other legislators?
Not that it came up, but it's perhaps something I could go away and look at again. Sure, I don't have any information on that really at the moment.
We'll be going into the Assembly chambers, after this to look at the physical opportunities that could be there for electronic voting. So we'll maybe come back to you if later when we look at that in the chamber and we've looked at our strategic planning to see if this is something that will be taken forward rather than... But what you've provided so far has been really helpful. Members, I'm coming to yourselves to see if there's anybody has any questions.
In all systems, it's very, very dependent on good communication in terms of having an infrastructure there that will facilitate electronic voting. And I think just in our case in particular, and in this building, more so than anywhere else, where there's definitely a problem in times of just connectivity and the likes of it, so that is it possible for us to move in that direction given that is a major problem?
Yes.
I know steps have been taken to improve, for example, the Wi-Fi system in the building, but I'm probably straying into territory that other people might be best able to advise on. I suppose there's a difference if you just want to keep it in the chamber. In theory, it's easier. If you want to move to a remote system, then that does bring in issues around Wi-Fi and connectivity.
Which is a fair point, yeah.
And I just think of one other question, Chair. Has any sort of assessment been done in terms of, let's say, costs at all for any type of system that...
I think that would probably come back to whether or not we take the decision. Then I imagine the Assembly Commission would then go and look at cost of what type that we might decide would be brought in.
Yeah.
Which is going to be a significant investment, I would imagine.
That's what I thought too, even though I noticed in one of the reports there where they said that they didn't allow cost to influence. I think in the case of America, was it?
Yeah,
the cost was not a determinant factor there, but I'd have thought that in our case, and again to go back to the whole idea of connectivity and the likes of it in particular, I thought they'd been two sort of very important factors.
Anyone else have any questions?
Just on the cost, Chair, I actually noticed, I'm not sure which one it was there, to upgrade the system was 270,000.
I think that was Scotland, perhaps.
Yeah. I think cost will be a big factor in this place.
I think part of the
I'll put it out there, our position will be that we wouldn't support electronic voting.
Yeah. This is the sort of things, I know that my particular interest is how long will it save time, having done a private members bill with hours of time for all the different amendments and changes and votes that were taken on that. Would it have quickened that up? I'm not sure. We know, as you have discussed in your paper, when it comes to the amendment stage, and, my goodness, whatever way it's listed on the papers compared to how the votes happen and how different decisions affect the running, oh my goodness, I just wonder, it'll take a bit of time for changes for all members. But as Militia has said, the communications on that would need to be key. I think the ability to, if you've made a mistake, to change a vote. One of the things I am interested in is here we have an additional feature, the designations. So I'm assuming whatever card would be carrying information about the member, not just their name, but also their designation and so on. So at least we wouldn't have to have extra buttons for that. Yeah, but it was just to that security, making sure that that was.
I think that's really security. Well, obviously, cost is, but if it's installed security, is it more efficient? And I think that's difficult to answer, as I say. You know, comparing one legislature with another and their way of doing things it's tricky.
I agree with Ray. I think it is difficult to calculate the time saving part of this because it's semi-electronic at the moment. It's changed even from I came here. I think we didn't used to have the system where the clerks
Computer,
look your name and all of that. But we've done that, and we could go in and sit for 10 minutes after that before it's worked out. That's electronic. That's not manual.
And if we're to allow 15 minutes for each vote, to be honest, I think sometimes going through the chamber it can be quicker than that. But it's the time afterwards for the calculation. But we can discuss the physicality of what it could look like, and that'll help guide our thoughts as we're going forward. But Ray, if anybody else has any questions, just double check.
That's just one other one, sorry, Ray. It's interesting in terms of and I'm trying to keep an open mind what it would look like for just to try and explore in my own mind, but everyone's issued with a card. By nature of most of us, we lose things. How do other places facilitate members whenever they haven't got cards on the day?
Well, the US House of Representatives, if you forgot your card, you can go up and sign the form and give it to the clerk and say, this is how I wish to vote. There were no examples, really, in the Scottish Parliament and Welsh Parliament. I mean, there have to be provisions for if you don't have your card with you, if you've forgotten your card.
And then the other thing, I suppose, wants to stop me taking Robbie Butler's card and using it if he wasn't here today.
I know that we've talked about there was designated seats.
I mean, the issue that the Doyle ran into, I get, that just falls under really security and.
It's all of these things we need to consider, but we will be going into the chamber shortly. Excuse me, I think I'm going to sneeze. We'll be going into to see the practicalities of what electronic voting could be, but no decision being taken in this. We're looking at our strategic planning after the chamber visit, and we'll have the opportunity to decide if this is something we want to take forward. William, sorry, you've indicated.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. In relation to the possibility of proxy or substitute voting, does it make it more difficult?
Well, we don't have substitute voting for the chamber. The only thing that we have at the moment, or we are considering bringing in, is proxy voting for parental leave. So
does electronic voting possibility make it more difficult to do that? Does it?
I think we'll have to. If we already are bringing forward proxy voting for parental leave, it will mean that the proxy will have to have the ability to vote on behalf of someone else. So there would have to be considered, if we're taking forward electronic voting, I'm sure it makes it more complicated, absolutely, but if it's based on a card system, yeah.
I would have thought it makes it more complicated. I would have thought so, yeah.
Yeah. There would have to be some way that the proxy would be able to vote either through biometrics or a card or whatever way that would be on behalf of someone else. But if we decide that we are taking it forward, that would be part of our considerations. If we're not going to take it forward, then the what we have for parental leave means that the proxy goes into the voting chambers the same way as they do now and name who they're voting for. Yeah.
Sure. Just Ray, was there any? I take it that you didn't come across any examples of where electronic voting's being used and they had to use the provision of proxy voting?
No. I didn't actually. No, it is an interesting area. I suppose if the committee sort of decide to look more closely at electronic voting, you can kind of really get into the weeds, and those could be areas that could be teased out, maybe more so.
Well, it was a great paper. It's just all of the models are all very different, so it makes it harder for us to try and visualise us using one or another. You know, it's a conversation we'll have to have after we physically go into the chamber and hear what could possibly work here locally.
And I do think, although the the research paper is useful, but it is one of those things I think you sort of need to see and to visualise, and
Well, members, on that note then, I think it's time that we do go and have a look.
Can I just ask you just one, and again, yeah, it does explain well in terms of different legislators, how they work. There's nothing actually in there that, I'm not saying, sorry, that's not criticism, but is there anywhere you can actually find the benefits of it? Is there any work done on benefits? Because I mean, I think the whole purpose of changing things should be, there should be clear evidence that it will be a benefit to something, as opposed to just doing it because it's the sexy thing to do now, because everyone wants it electronic, you know.
If it saves time, that would be my key thing, but
it's hard to understand that it does whenever you look at two legislators who used it and actually went back to manual voting again.
And this is something we'll certainly consider. I think that what we'll do now is we'll visit the chamber, and then when we do our strategic review, we'll certainly tease that out more, and then we can ask, of course, for further work on that.
Chair, just Mr. No, as I say, it's not an area that sort of gathers a lot of academic interest, so it's hard to sort of, get academic journals or you can clearly see the benefits or not of electronic voting. It just seems to be something that Scotland and Wales have done it for so long that it's just an accepted part of the process.
Right, thank you very much for your paper. I know you're coming with us into the chamber. That would be very useful, to be honest, having yourself hear what we're hearing. Members, just before we move into the chamber, just to finish off what we have now for this meeting, and then because whenever we move into the chamber, there will be no access for an online version, so it's an informal meeting, so we can all ask questions and do that, and then we'll move up to the members' dining room. But just under agenda item 6 very quickly, response has been received from Jerry Carroll, MLA, to the committee's letter requesting views on what aspects should be covered in the potential review of Assembly oral questions. That correspondence is at page 51 of your pack. Mr Carroll has indicated he would like to see an increase in the amount of time allocated to oral questions, and he also states that ministers often delay in providing answers to Assembly written questions. Members will give further consideration to the priority of the potential review of Assembly oral questions at the strategic priorities part of our meeting later on this morning. And just if you're happy to note that response from Jerry Carroll, MLA. Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 7, the Forward Work Programme. An updated Forward Work Programme is at pages 57 and 58 of your pack. Immediately following this, we will undertake a review of the strategic priorities in the speakers or the private dining room, the green one, on the first floor. The outcome of the review will inform the development of our work programme until Christmas and then beyond. So members, just to ask if you want to agree the work programme until we get clarification out of our discussion. Agenda item 8, any other business anybody wants to bring up? No? The date, time and place of our next meeting is Wednesday the 9th of October at 10 o'clock in room 21. Now the meeting is currently adjourned and we'll be moving to the Assembly chamber for our briefing on the infrastructure and electronic voting system. So members will be starting that. I'll give it about, well, if anybody wants to take a short break, it's saying on the clock there that it's 11:15, so if we can all be in the chamber for no later than 10 to 11, then we'll get that started because we want time for our strategic planning. So we'll now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Okay.
Good.
It's strategic planning today, is it?
Yes.
Rolling your eyes, Trevor.
Is it?